guys, it is story time. You like my mug? Introverted, but willing to discuss anime. And also willing to discuss my Japanese quarantine process situation. So at the end of December 2021, I wanted to go visit my friends and family who I hadn't seen in such a long time in the United States, with the hopes of getting back into Japan as a resident of Japan. At the time, Japan was, and probably still, one of the harder countries to get into because of quarantine and COVID. This process could only be done at the time if you were a resident of Japan. Like, you couldn't even have a business visa. You already had to have a work visa in Japan and have your residency already in place to get back in. So if you were not getting into Japan without a residence card. Now, my quarantine took place all the way back in January of this year, 2022. And the reason why I didn't vlog it at the time is because it was actually a very stressful situation. I had to pay attention a whole lot and focus on the paperwork, focus on the rules of the quarantine. I really didn't want to risk my Japanese residency by making a mistake or something. Just didn't want to deal with all of the paperwork I had to do and all of the things I had to keep track of on top of vlogging. Now, I think it's more fun to tell the story way after the fact. And the reason I tell it is because honestly, the whole process is so interesting. Like, Japan really thought this through, and whether or not you agree, if it was even helpful, it happened, I went through it, and yeah, I'm gonna share it with you. In December of 2021, I decided to go see my friends and family who I hadn't seen in a few years because of everything going on in the world. At the time, I was on a Facebook page called Getting Back to Japan Support or something along the lines of that, where it was basically just a big support group helping people understand the paperwork, understand the rules, understand their eligibility to get back into Japan if they were to leave. I was checking this Facebook group every single day in December until I left because the rules were forever changing. At the time, Omicron was becoming more of a thing. At any moment, the virus could have gotten worse and Japan could have shut everything down again. I was researching for probably every single day for a month on how to do this process. Getting into America was actually the easy part. The only requirements needed to get into the United States was you had to be a citizen or a resident, I believe, and I don't even think you had to have your vaccines at the time, which it didn't matter to me. I had mine, so I knew that wasn't going to be an issue for me, but you did have to have a negative test. So I had to test in Japan before I left. And before they would even let me through security at the airport, you had to get a test. This was stressful enough for, I would say, 3 reasons. One, the test had to be within, I think at the time, 24 hours of leaving Japan. So you had to make sure to schedule an appointment at a clinic that did the correct test, because you couldn't just take a home test or like a $25 test. No, I went to a clinic that wrote me specific paperwork in English that I could give to authorities in the United States saying that I had been tested and tested negative at that, which was honestly the second stressful thing, was making sure that I didn't catch the virus or get sick or anything before taking the test. Like, my entire plans would have been ruined. I mean, I had bought a plane ticket that I could have gotten a refund on if I needed to, but just the hassle of that, if I were to have a negative test for any reason, that would have been really just heartbreaking. And then the third reason why it was so annoying was because of the cost. It cost me 12,000 yen. I would tell you what that is in US dollars, but the yen is 12,000 yen to me is almost kind of like $110. So $110 for a COVID test that I needed to board this airplane. You had to book the appointment correctly, like with enough time to spare, and make sure that your paperwork would be understood to US officials. You had to hope and pray that you weren't gonna test positive, and you had to shell out 12,000 yen, so lots of fun. And that was the easiest part. Getting into America was very easy. Despite the flight being a nightmare and the woman next to me putting her actual feet in my seat and her husband next to her calling the hostesses fat to their face, The flight was not that bad other than those things. I got through customs very easily in the United States, but I still had a lot of anxiety looming over me because crap, like I'm in America and there is a chance that if this virus gets worse, I'm not gonna be able to get back into Japan, where everything I have is my apartment, my stuff, my husband, my life is here, so I definitely need to get back here. But obviously before I even landed in America, I had researched how to get back into Japan. Obviously you needed your Japanese residency, but you also had to have a negative PCR test, a negative Japan approved PCR test. You thought the 12,000 yen PCR test was expensive. I paid $290 for the Japan approved PCR test. I was flying out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and I had to go to like some Charlotte clinic and shell out $290 so that they could stick a Q-tip up my nose. Nonetheless, it was required. So it was a doctor's note written along with the test. You couldn't just show up with a negative test result on your phone. You had to have a doctor's note written as well. You had to fill out official paperwork from the Japanese government that you could print off online. You had to bring your vaccination cards, which I had gotten my vaccines in Japan, so that was all, I wasn't too worried about that because my vaccine cards were in Japanese. And concerning the tests, like the same thing applies with the first one where I had to test negative, and I went to an anime convention a couple days before I had to take the test, so I was not being careful. Fortunately though, I did test negative, and the next morning I was going to be on my way to Japan. So now we get to the fun part, the flight. So I flew from Charlotte, North Carolina to Dallas, Texas. The flight to Japan was so weird because my flight was 2 hours delayed. Because of that, American Airlines had said people who have connecting flights in Japan will not make their flight because of the delay. 3/4 of the people that planned to be on that plane, which was already not very many people because not a lot of people were traveling to Japan, didn't get on the plane, which made the airplane very, very empty. Every flight I've been on to Japan, the flight has been absolutely full. There's not been one seat open. Before you even get on the plane, you actually have to have your ticket stamped that proves that you showed the American Airlines staff that you have a residence card to Japan. You have to show them your Japanese government paperwork that you filled out, your vaccination cards, and your negative test. I felt a little bit better once I showed them all that paperwork, and like if you lose one single piece of that paperwork, like you're screwed. You are not getting on that plane. I was just relieved every single time I stepped through another like level of finally getting back to Japan, like getting through security in Charlotte, and then getting my ticket stamped in Dallas, and then like finally being let on the plane. Like I just wanted to be on the plane. I had a whole row to myself. I had the row behind me, the row in front of me, the other 3 rows, like down the fuselage, free, no one around. I think there was honestly maybe 30 people on that airplane. Now here's where it gets very, very fun. I had landed at Tokyo Narita on like late January 2022. Things were basically as strict as ever. The plane would pull up to an area of the airport that was completely blocked off from domestic flights, from anyone else. When the plane pulled up, we actually had to wait for about half an hour to let the officials get everything ready. We got off the plane, and actually there was a military wife behind me, like a US military wife. As we were walking to our first checkpoint, which was to check paperwork, spoiler alert, they check your paperwork like 18 times before you're actually, everything's said and done. I was talking to the military wife behind me, and she looks at her American Airlines app and goes, "Oh, my bags are in Mexico." I'm like, oh man, poor girl, like she's gonna have to wait for her luggage. And so I checked my app, and my luggage was also sent to Mexico. At that time, I didn't know how I was gonna get my luggage because I knew I was gonna go into Japanese quarantine, so I couldn't just like wait at the airport for it. I had no idea how that process was gonna go, so that added a whole other layer of anxiety. So about the 30 of us that get off of that Boeing 747, you walk through this one area of the airport that's like all barriered off, and there's chairs lined up like in the Japanese way where like they're all like perfectly aligned. And by the way, you had to be masked up. Like don't even come at me, like oh my god. Everyone had to be masked That was not even, like, you couldn't argue that. You cannot argue that in Japan. We actually sat in this waiting area for, honestly, almost 40 minutes. You had to wait for your name to be called, and then you would show them your negative COVID test. You would show them your vaccine cards. You would show them your residence card. You would show them the government paperwork that you had to print out, read, fill in, and sign. After that, they would take you to a back room where there were like stalls almost with just like little barriers, like curtains between them. This was the testing room, and they would give you a vial that you had to like spit in. And I don't know if you've been on a 10-hour flight before and like you try not to drink that much, because if you drink a lot you have to pee all the time. Well, I don't like to drink a lot on flights because I don't like to get up and pee all the time. Well, like, it's hard to spit in a vial when you haven't been drinking water for the last 12 hours. You spit in the vials, hand it off to the doctors, and then they send you on your way. Each area of this process, of this like check-in to Japan process, they're all far away from each other. Like, getting off the plane and then getting to the testing area is quite a long walk. And then they send you on another fairly long walk down to where they teach you about the quarantine app. The officials made you download this app onto your phone that actually tracks your movements. So you had to turn location on your phone and turn the location on within that application, because they just assumed wherever you go, your phone will go, and that's how they track you. Fortunately, this process would have taken way longer if I did not have halfway decent Japanese. I was able to attend the Japanese session of them explaining the rules of the app, which did make the process go by faster than people waiting for like the English one or whatever other languages. I'll go more into the app and what the point of it is and what I had to do on it every day when I get to the hotel quarantine. So after about a 30-minute explanation of the phone app, they send you to walk another 30 minutes to have more paperwork checked. Yes, the paperwork that you thought was checked in Dallas, the paperwork that you thought was checked when you got off the plane, the paperwork that you thought was checked when they explained the phone app to you, they check it again. I think I filled in paperwork saying the same stuff 5 times. If you know anything about Japanese work or Japanese paperwork, everything has to be perfect. If you make a mistake, you either have to redo the entire piece of paper, or you have to have like a hanko, which is a Japanese stamp that proves that you are who you are. You can't just sign it and they cross it out in a whole specific way. If you've done Japanese paperwork, you know, but if you haven't, just be thankful that you haven't had to do Japanese paperwork. Now, by this time that I was filling out more and more paperwork, I had already learned about the app. I had already been off the plane for about 2 hours, to give you an idea about how long this is all taking, like not even at actual immigration yet. I finally came upon the waiting area for your tests. Now, the way that this would work is that on the vial, there would be a number, and then they would give you a ticket with that number on it, and then you had to wait in the terminal, by the way. The terminal, completely dead. Like, none of the restaurants are open, none of the shops are open. It's just you and hundreds of other people waiting for their COVID test announcement. You'd have the speakers on in the terminal, and when they called your number, then you were able to go get your test result. I sat there for 2 hours. Now imagine having kids in this scenario. Like, you've been on a 10-hour plane ride. You haven't even reached immigration yet, and it's been 4 hours. Like, the quarantine officers weren't giving any food out, so like you had to make sure to bring your own snacks, which thank goodness I did. It only took 2 hours of me sitting in that chair. And I say only 2 hours because I did hear that some people were waiting like up to 4 or 5 hours. If you went through it, let me know like what your experience was in the comments. Honestly, everyone I think had a different experience. I go and find out that my test is negative. Now, even if you had a negative test, you still had to do the hotel quarantine. I think if you test positive, you had to quarantine for 2 weeks, but if you test negative, you only had to quarantine in a hotel for 3 days. Then you have to walk all the way to the official immigration area, which is like another 30-minute walk. That was actually a lot of what took a lot of the time, was the walking. Honestly, at this time, it could have been like almost 5 hours since I got off the plane. Finally get to immigration, which was really, this was like the weirdest part to me, is that I thought that once I got to immigration, everything would be totally fine, like I wouldn't have any issues. I went up to the immigration officer and showed him all my paperwork, and I've never had this happen when I get into Japan, but one of the immigration officers actually like pulled me to the side and took me to the back room, like the back room where they put like the suspicious people. I'm not sure if there was like something weird with my paperwork, or if they just like choose people out of like every 100 people to like pull back there. They just wanted to double check all my paperwork, and I was like, man, to get this far and not be able to get in Japan, I would lose my mind. That process was fairly quick, and I was let through immigration and then officially in the country. Past immigration is the baggage area. Fortunately, American Airlines had already contacted me about my bags being in Mexico. They were definitely in Mexico. Fortunately, the American Airlines staff assured me I would get my bags back, and they asked me where my quarantine location was, which I didn't know that yet. I hadn't gotten the quarantine location assigned yet. As far as I knew, I was gonna get that assigned like on the bus to the quarantine location. So I just told them, I don't know, and good luck figuring it out. I leave the baggage area, and we were all instructed to, and everything is very barriered off, so like you can't accidentally go to another part of the airport. Like they wanted to keep you as far away from other like citizens as much as possible. I left baggage and sat in another waiting room for, this was only about 45 minutes until they had the buses ready. I think this is when they actually started to hand out paperwork of like where your hotel quarantine would be. And I got put in the Appa Hotel Rogoku? I always say that wrong. Appa Hotel Rogoku. I was relieved to hear this because I actually knew about the Appa Hotel, and I knew it was a really nice place to stay. There had been people who did not get very nice hotels to stay in, and I really lucked out. And I'm so sorry if you went through Japanese quarantine and you got like not a great hotel, or I heard that there were even like some dorm rooms that were opening up places for people to stay and they didn't have internet or TVs or anything. That would have really sucked. After one last final check of paperwork and to making sure you had the app on your phone, they all put us in a bus, you know, about 50 people on a bus, and we set off from Narita Airport to our hotel in Rogoku, Tokyo. Everyone gets off the bus, and then we go into the Appa Hotel lounge or lobby for another paperwork check. You really want to make sure you keep your I had folders and folders of paper. I think I had a stack of papers this thick by the time it was all said and done. They would just tell you general rules, like you're not allowed to leave your room, you're not allowed to go anywhere else in the hotel but straight to your room. Fortunately, they had dinner waiting for us there. I think at this time it was like midnight. So from the plane pulling into the airport to getting up in the hotel was a little over 6 hours. People had to go one by one in the elevators to go up to their rooms. And fortunately, I got a corner room, which I think was a little bit bigger than the rest of the rooms. Like, I really lucked out. I had a really good view of Tokyo Skytree and Mount Fuji. The quarantine officers had told us that we would be getting 3 meals a day, and there were announcements. I think I have a video of the announcements. These announcements would come several times a day. They gave us thermometers, actually, that we had to use every morning. We had to take our temperature every morning and then report it on our quarantine phone app to the officials. I remember just like getting into the room and digging into the food, taking a shower. Oh my gosh, it was the best shower of my life. I was just trying to mostly focus on the phone app, which was very important because on the phone app, you actually had to check in several times a day. I would say maybe about 4 to 6 times a day. You would get an alert on your phone telling you to check in. I think they did this so that you won't leave your phone anywhere and then try to leave the quarantine hotel or leave quarantine in general. I do know of people who like would miss check-ins on the phone and nothing happened, so it honestly probably wasn't that big of a deal, but I, as a resident card holder of Japan for only 4 years, did not want to break any rules, so I checked in every single time. 3 meals were brought to me every single day in the quarantine hotel, and I think I have pictures of them too and videos. This is like all my favorite stuff, like fruit, this stuff. The egg, not a big fan of the egg, I'll still eat it, but Saba fish, that is where it's at. So good. They mostly consisted of Japanese food. Like, you didn't get a choice, by the way. You could choose, like, if you wanted the vegetarian option. There's like normal and vegetarian option, but if you don't like Japanese food, you were not having a good time. You could use Uber Eats, but they wouldn't allow you to order like non-shelf safe food. So any food that was like hot and ready to eat or had to be refrigerated or frozen, they did not allow you to order that from Uber Eats because the quarantine staff, it wasn't really their job to bring up like Uber orders all day because the Uber drivers aren't allowed to bring the food up. They're not even allowed in the quarantine hotel. Like, they're not even allowed like within the premises of the Opera Hotel. So I guess the quarantine officers didn't want like so much food coming in and then they not being able to take it to every room in time for it to like stay hot or good or frozen. So I guess because of health reasons, they would only let us order things like chips and sodas and stuff. I only used Uber Eats once because it was so expensive, but I really wanted some oi ocha and some potato chips, so I did do that. I was pretty happy with the Japanese food. I had spent almost a month in America eating nothing but hamburgers like and pizza every single day, so I was really excited to eat some Japanese food, so I didn't mind it at all. Like, I love rice and fish and just little weird Japanese bento things, so I was totally cool with it personally. I know that a lot of people hated the food. The Facebook group that I told you earlier was always just constant posts about how disgusting the food was, but didn't matter to me. Basically what I did with my time was I watched all of High Rise Invasion. I started Monster Hunter Rise and played most of the story for that. I kept myself pretty entertained. I'm not one of those people that has to leave my house. I spend all of August not leaving my house because it's too hot. So like not leaving the bed or a hotel room for 3 days, I mean, that's, I've been depressed. That's easy for me. To me, the 3 days went over just like that. The only thing I didn't like, it was just if you've been in Japanese hotel rooms, you know they're tiny. There wasn't really a lot of areas to like exercise, which was a little annoying. I still didn't want to vlog in there just because I was just so exhausted and so relieved. Like, I think when I entered that hotel room, I was almost in tears because the whole situation was so stressful. And I had heard stories of like people being turned away at the border, like being turned away at boarding for forgetting one little thing. And so I just was so worried about that. The next step of the process after the 3 days was that we would leave our hotel rooms one by one down the elevator. And then get into the bus and they would take us back to Narita Airport. Now, quarantine wasn't over. We had to do 3 days in a quarantine hotel, but then we had to do the rest of our week, so like about 4 or 5 days at home quarantine. And this is where all the paperwork came in. You had to write down like a contract. You had to basically sign a contract saying like, this is my address, this is where I will be staying during quarantine, and I promise not to leave, and if I do leave, you're just gonna kick me out of Japan. You weren't allowed to use public transportation at the time, and my husband and I don't have a car, so he actually had to, after work, rent a car and drive down to Narita Airport, which we don't live too far away from. Drove down to Narita Airport and picked me up in the car, and we had to drive straight home, and I had to check in on my phone. It's like, this is the location that I'm staying at for the rest of the 4 days. And then I did just that. I stayed home for 4 days, which is, again, not difficult for me to do. The phone app was still tracking you, so I definitely couldn't leave the house no matter what. I had to check in on the app about 4 to 6 times a day. Oh my god, I forgot to tell you the creepiest part about the app. To check in, you had like different kinds of check-ins where you had to just like tap a notification and check in that way, but they also had like video call check-ins where you would just open a video call and you would see your face, like a selfie screen, but you would never see someone on the other side of the call. I think they were just like watching you. It's really creepy. But yeah, you just had to kind of like put your face in the camera for 30 seconds so that they could kind of see that you're at home or in your quarantine hotel. That was weird. That would only usually happen about 2 or 3 times a day. A lot of people complain it was like invasion of privacy, but I mean, I got free food for 3 days. I'm easy to please. Yeah, that was my quarantine experience. It honestly, for me, was not that bad of an experience. It was expensive because of the tests I had to buy, but I didn't have to pay for quarantine. The quarantine hotel was free. The food that we got during quarantine was free, so I didn't have to pay for any of that. The worst part of the situation was honestly just like the stress of getting the paperwork correct. I don't even know how to explain to you how much paperwork there was and how you needed like a specific Japan approved PCR test. Like, there were definitely people who got the wrong COVID test and tried to get into the country and were denied. So anything could have happened. Anyway guys, that's it for my story. I think I'm trying to make sure I didn't think of anything. Oh, I did! I got my bags, by the way. I forgot about that. They did send my bags to my quarantine hotel like 2 days into quarantine, so that was good. They definitely did go to Mexico. They could have put like some tequila in there to like be sorry, but they did not. If you guys have any questions for me, let me know down in the comments. I'd like to answer any you might have, and hopefully I'll see you in future videos. Bye!